Hello, this is Good Morning Transfers. We're into the final stretch of the January window. What will the final few days have in store for us? Miguel Almiron could leave Newcastle with Al-Shabaab trying to sign him. Keenan Dewsbury-Hall's been Leicester's standout player this season. Could he be set for a return to the Premier League? And despite it looking like he was going to Tottenham, Brentford looked to have won the race to sign the exciting prospect Antonio Nusa. So here's what's to look forward to today. First, we've picked out some players that could be on the move. At 9:15, we'll discuss whether Leicester could lose Dewsbury Hall. At 9:30, we'll hear from Eddie Howe, and at 9:45, we'll bring you Chris Wilder's news conference. So good morning to all of you at home, and to Ellen Ellard, to Beda Haroon, and to Dave Reed. So not long to go in what has been an unusually quiet window so far, but the last few days always tends to be very busy. So we've picked out 4 players that could still be on the move. And first, it's Miguel Almiron, who's been linked with a move to the Saudi Pro League side, Al-Shabaab. Right, we're going to hear from Eddie Howe later on this hour, but what did he have to say at the weekend, Dave?
Interesting to hear what Eddie Howe has to say today about Miguel Almiron. The player missed Newcastle's FA Cup tie at Fulham. Eddie Howe said that was due to illness, which is curious around the end of the transfer deadline, as we always like to say. But at his Friday news conference, Eddie Howe was quite unequivocal, really. He said that he's desperate to keep Miguel Almiron, and he hopes that he will be here by the end of the deadline on Thursday night. He basically said, you know, he's not across it in daily or hourly situation. He's not quite keeping across it like that with the owners. But from what we hear at Sky Sports News, Al-Shabaab, the Saudi club, confident of signing Miguel Almiron before the transfer window closes. I think from Newcastle's point of view, Almiron is the most saleable asset in this window. He would bring in good money, and that would allow Newcastle to reinvest in a midfielder, central midfielder, which is where they're looking to strengthen in this transfer window. So when you look at the 3 players that Newcastle potentially could have lost in this window, Kieran Trippier, Callum Wilson and Miguel Almiron, you would think that Almiron would bring in the biggest fee.
Yeah, well, we're going to be talking Newcastle later on after we hear from Eddie Howe. But meanwhile, Armando Broja has been linked with a move away from Chelsea, although it's understood they want £50 million for him. Wolves and Fulham have been linked, but it looks like Wolves won't be able to get that deal done. But Ellen, in terms of Chelsea's point of view, why might they let Broja go?
I think there's lots of reasons. Obviously, struggled for game time and form, had that ACL injury that saw him out for nearly a year, and then coming back, he's had a couple more knocks to the knee. He had a 3-game spell on the sidelines from the end of October into the start of November. I think from Chelsea's point of view, he's dispensable, only 2 goals this season. Trying to find that form again, trying to find that momentum, but Chelsea, I don't think, is the place to do that for him. He does represent pure profit from a Chelsea point of view, came through the youth ranks there. So from a profit and sustainability point of view, that sale would do a lot for them, 100% profit for them. They have other options, obviously Nicholas Jackson, Christopher Nkunku, with them coming back as well. I think Chelsea need a striker regardless, whether Broja stays or not. So for me, if they can sell him, make 100% profit on him, then that money is there for a more experienced striker, someone who can get up and running a lot quicker than Broja has.
And if that does happen, Nabeed, would Chelsea need to be active to replace him?
I think, as Ellen said there, I think Chelsea need a number 9 anyway, someone who can put the ball in the back of the net on a regular basis. Nicholas Jackson obviously is at Chelsea. I don't think he's been as bad as people have said, but ultimately he's not a man who's going to get you 25 goals a season. And then Broja, who's been injured, and I think there was a period when he was at Southampton where you saw probably the best of him. But again, in that period, you saw that he suited playing for a side in a sort of like a mid-block, knocking the ball into channels. I don't think Chelsea want to play that style of football either. And then Christopher Nkunku hasn't settled because of injury problems. So I think whether they sell Broja, whether they sell anyone, in the end, the one signing Chelsea need is a number 9, which is why they've been so aggressively linked to Victor Osimhen.
Yeah, and other strikers as well. And Dave, just looking at that, the kind of balance of the Chelsea squad, we know about the amount of business that they've done in the last 3 transfer windows, including this one, since Todd Bowley's been there anyway. But it does seem to be that there's a gaping hole up front. Yes, Nicholas Jackson is a striker, and Nkunku's been injured, Broja has been injured as well. But even so, it looks like there is space for someone.
Yeah, and I think obviously they've been hampered by the Nkunku injury. I think if he'd have been fit and playing, maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation, because Nkunku can knit so many different things together. You know, he can play up front as well. He can play off the striker. Maybe if he'd have been fit, playing and on top form, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But the fact that he hasn't has opened up the door, really, for another striker to be brought by Chelsea. And I think we've seen a few stories linking them with, like, Karim Benzema from Saudi. But I don't think that is the route that the Chelsea ownership group want to go down. I think they would prefer to bring in younger players and players that they can mould a little bit under Mauricio Pochettino. So I don't think that is something that will happen, particularly in this January transfer window. But I think for Chelsea's point of view, it feels like they need to set themselves up for the summer. And to set themselves up for the summer, they need a good sale. And to get a good sale, they need someone to sell for profit. And that would bring in the likes of Broja and Conor Gallagher and Trevor Chalobah, which is why we're talking about them, because that money goes straight into the summer budget. And I think that's what Chelsea are trying to do, set themselves up for a big hitter to come in the summer in that number 9 position. Yeah,
and we will get to Gallagher in a moment, but potentially, you see Højbjerg up there, potentially this is linked actually, because Pierre-Emile Højbjerg said it'll go down to the wire. It looks like that way. Sky Germany's Florian Plettenberg last night said that he has rejected the chance to join Lyon out in France. Dave, will Tottenham be relaxed about Højbjerg's future? I think so. I think they'll be pretty comfortable with the situation around Højbjerg. I don't think they're in any rush to let him go, certainly not on loan. I think if he was to leave before the deadline, it would be for a full transfer and a fairly good price from Tottenham's point of view. I don't think they're in a particular rush to make any significant changes in their midfield either. And I guess, you know, to say that Højbjerg is totally out of the picture at Tottenham would be wrong. I think he's played a part in all but one of Tottenham's games this season. So to say that he's totally out of the picture and way out of Ange Postecoglou's plans would be wrong. There is a need and there is a desire for Højbjerg to be playing from the head coach. So that's why I don't think they're going to be in any rush to sell him. Having said that, if a good offer does come in, I think it would be considered by Tottenham. It certainly would have been in the summer window just gone. And I think, given that midfield is an area of strength at the moment for Tottenham, I think they would consider a full sale. But if it doesn't happen, Tottenham have a very good player. They still have a very good player, and I think he will play a part for Tottenham by the end of the season as well. So I think there's lots of clubs that are interested in him. Lyon there, Napoli had been looking at him, Juventus as well. So it's about whether anybody wants to pay the price, and if they don't, I think Tottenham will be very, very relaxed to be keeping Højbjerg around, because he's a fantastic professional. Can they actually afford to lose him, in terms of money? I mean, in terms of numbers, Nabeed?
I think so. I think the reason he's featured so much this season is due to injuries. And I don't know if, Spurs could be really unlucky and have all these injuries again or suspensions again. But obviously, Basuma and Sarr, they're probably their starting midfielders, along with Bentancur. So there's your first three. Then there's Lo Celso and Skip. They've obviously been linked to Gallagher, which we're going to talk about. And then there's Maddison as well. So they've got a lot of options in midfield. I think Højbjerg is sort of one of these players that he's ever reliable. He's always available. He often doesn't... He's not going to give you a 10 out of 10 performance, but he doesn't often give you a 2 out of 10 either. But I think if Spurs want to step up and go to the next level, your replacement players need to also impact the way you play football. And I don't think he impacts it really in a negative or a positive way. He just is there a lot of the time. And so I think in that sense, like, that's probably why he leans more towards someone like Lo Celso. He moves the needle a little bit more. But again, it comes down to, can they sell him? Can they get the money they want for him? And then can they reinvest that money into someone else, which we are going to talk about. And I do think Conor Gallagher is the suitable choice if Højbjerg is to go.
Yeah, so what happens to Conor Gallagher if Højbjerg does go, Ellen?
Yeah, well, Nabeed's just explained it quite well there. You know, there's this change, this domino effect that could come in. Obviously, if Højbjerg were to leave, it would open up that space in the midfield. Spurs have said that they want to bolster it. Obviously, they look fairly strong there already, but as we've mentioned, Postecoglou's not going to want the risk of what he's seen. You know, the way they were struck by injuries earlier on in the season, you know, lucky to see so many of those players starting to return now. But, you know, they want to keep that squad depth as strong as possible. It would free up the budget as well, as Nabeed said. Obviously, Gallagher represents pure profit for Chelsea, as was mentioned, but the manager has made his value so clear. Pochettino has, you know, been handing him the armband. He's been performing so well. You know, he's been a real focus point of this Chelsea squad. he's just so valued there. So I think they'd only really be open for offers if they came at the right price. And I think it's one of those things we've spoken about where there's a disconnect, I think, slightly between the manager at Chelsea. He obviously wants to keep him, but, you know, from a board's point of view, he represents 100% pure profit. Then from the manager on the opposing side as well, and Postecoglou, obviously a huge fan of the midfielder. So I think if the domino effect started to fall, he'd be in prime position to walk into the spot that Højbjerg could leave in Spurs.
Utmost respect for Conor Gallagher in this situation, because it's not just this window that everybody's been talking about him, it's the last window as well. And it was right up until deadline day in the last summer window that we were talking about a potential move for Conor Gallagher. It's going to be right up until deadline day in this transfer window where we're going to be talking about a move for Conor Gallagher. And he has been one of Chelsea's exceptional players this season, probably alongside Cole Palmer. So he's been absolutely terrific. And like you say, you know, Pochettino's made it clear that he wants to keep him and he's a part of his plans. The difference is, with 18 months left on his contract, how is he valued by the Chelsea ownership? Is he being offered a contract that is worthy of his place within the Chelsea starting 11? Is that contract on a par with some of the other superstars that Chelsea have decided to bring in over the last 18 months to 2 years under the Todd Boehly ownership? So from his point of view, he's got to weigh up his value to that Chelsea side. You know, put aside his love for the club. We know how much he loves playing for Chelsea. But if the ownership aren't valuing him, similar situation to Mason Mount, what's he supposed to do?
It's a weird situation, because I think Chelsea fans want to upgrade Conor Gallagher because they feel there's a better midfielder out there potentially that will help their midfield three grow and maybe be better in possession, or maybe better to watch in possession. And then for Spurs, Conor Gallagher is like an upgrade to Højbjerg and their options. So it's really strange, because at the moment, if you look at the Premier League table, Spurs actually need the upgrades because they could be competing for the title, and Chelsea are a long way back. It's a really weird one. I think a lot of people are very split on whether Conor Gallagher is this player that can actually take a team to the next level, or whether he is just this player that's going to go from Spurs to Chelsea to Palace to somewhere else.
Dave, I understand the whole pure profit thing for PSR. I do understand it, but Mason Mount went, OK, pure profit, but he was, I think it's probably fair to say, he was a fan favourite at Chelsea. Loftus-Cheek, OK, fair enough, he'd been there a long time. Billy Gilmour hadn't played that much, but Tammy Abraham, although he's been injured this season, Chelsea have needed a striker ever since they let him go. All right, so do they miss him? Arguably, yes. Fikayo Tomori, brilliant since he's gone. Mark Guehi, could those two be in the Chelsea squad now without having to buy a replacement? Yes, OK, they've got the pure profit, but they could keep the player. And there's others as well who've gone who could still be in that squad. And you've got to remember Lewis Hall eventually goes to Newcastle for big money in the summer as well. At some point, someone's going to have to say, Conor Gallagher or one of these players, they are good enough for this team. Never mind the pure profit, we want the player.
Yeah, which is why I think the PSR situation as it stands, the rules as they are, the way that clubs are using it at the moment doesn't sit right with a lot of supporters, because players coming through the system, players coming through the academy, supporters have a connection with them. And I think a lot of supporters would like to see those players integrated into the first 11, not sold on at the first or second opportunity in order to make big money for the club. Now, Manchester City have done it, and they do it in a slightly different way, whereby maybe some of the players they've sold on weren't going to be at the required level to be a Manchester City player. But some of those names that you've spoken about there, Tom, Tomori, Tammy Abraham, Mount, now Gallagher, a lot of Chelsea supporters would say they're good enough still for the Chelsea team and for where they were going. But also, I mean, there's going to be a development with those players. It's not like at the point they sold them at, maybe they weren't, but you could see the potential, and given time, they would be at that required level. So I think the way the situation and the rules are as they are, for me, it doesn't feel right that clubs are using them to sell academy players, because there's a connection between those players. And I think the final point then would be, if Chelsea lose another player like that, it's the heart and soul of a football club, those academy players, the connection that they have with supporters in the stands, the family that they bring to games, everything around that player, everything around that club, there's a connection there with supporters. So Chelsea would lose some of that heart and soul if they let Conor Gallagher go.
Yeah, and they wouldn't have had John Terry for all those years, for instance, if this was the model back then. Right, loads more to come this hour. We'll be hearing from Eddie Howe at 9:30. Before that, could one of the standout players in the Championship be on the move? Welcome back to Good Morning Transfers and to a big story that broke over the weekend. Brighton and Brentford both want to sign Keenan Dewsbury Hall from Leicester before the deadline. Let's get more on this and speak to our senior reporter, Rob Dorset. Rob, welcome to the show. What's your understanding of this situation?
Well, it's pretty clear that Brighton and Brentford are both keen on Kiernan Dewsbury Hall. I've been told that a number of other clubs are monitoring the situation with Kiernan Dewsbury Hall as well. And if there is any acceptance on Leicester's part that they might want to sell him, then I think there'll be more people bidding for him, more clubs bidding for him than Brighton and Brentford alone. But, and this is the crucial factor, Leicester absolutely do not want to sell that man on your screen, Kiernan Dewsbury Hall, in this transfer window. They see him as an integral part of Enzo Maresca's plans. He's been arguably Leicester's best player this season. Instrumental in taking them 7 points clear at the top of the Championship, and they do not want to lose him. It would take a bid in excess of £40 million with add-ons to even bring Leicester to the table, I'm told. Remember, he's still in his mid-20s. He's at the peak of his powers. Probably his best years are still ahead of him. And so Leicester are aware of that and don't want to sell him. I think crucially, because we're quite late in the window as well, that is only going to up the price and up Leicester's reluctance to sell, because they would struggle to replace him, certainly to a player of any similar standard, in the final few days of the window. So I think it's really interesting to see what happens. No disrespect to Brentford and Brighton, but if one of the big guns of the Premier League or from Europe came in with a bid for Kiernan Dewsbury Hall, we may see a flurry of activity and a market, because look, Leicester are sailing a little bit close to the wind in terms of profit and sustainability rules. They can't really strengthen the squad without losing one or two players. And so to that end, they are interested in potentially deals for a number of players. The thing is, Kiernan Dewsbury Hall is certainly not somebody they want to sell, and they won't entertain offers for him unless it's a very, very big offer.
Morning, Robert. I guess Leicester will have to consider the impact on supporters as well, with one of the fan favourites possibly leaving. And the club are flying in the league, so, I mean, can they afford to lose him right now?
Well, that's a really good question, Dave. And the truth is, no, they can't. And Enzo Maresca has made that very clear to his bosses, as far as I understand, but behind the scenes. I mean, look, he's scored 9 goals. He's had 9 assists in the Championship already this season. The one area Leicester have been struggling, even though they're 7 points clear at the top of the Championship, has been actually in terms of strikers and people putting the ball in the back of the net. And that's where Dewsbury Hall has chipped in with 9 goals of his own and contributed some really important assists as well. So him and Harry Winks in the middle of that midfield are arguably as good as anybody's got in the bottom half of the Premier League, shall we say. And Leicester want those two to be their axis if and when they're promoted back to the Premier League. And so I think there's a longer term view from Leicester here, that what's the point in selling one of the jewels in their crown right now when they'd only have to replace him in the short term for their promotion push in the Championship, but in the longer term in the Premier League as well? And could they replace Kiernan Dewsbury Hall like for like, similar ability, for the sort of money that Brighton and Brentford are prepared to pay right now? I think the simple answer is no, but it's whether Brighton or Brentford are prepared to bust their bank and come back with a really significant offer, or whether somebody else is prepared to come in for him. But certainly the reluctance from a Leicester perspective is very, very obvious, I think. And add to the fact that Wilfred Ndidi is out injured at the moment. Cesare Cassidy went back on his loan deal as well. And so Enzo Maresca feels he's a little bit light in midfield. He's made that hint, hasn't he? When he said recently, after the draw with Ipswich, he said that there was a tiredness in midfield stemming from a lack of solutions, as he called it, and a lack of something different. So Maresca wants to strengthen. He certainly doesn't want to be selling.
I think you've voiced a lot of the concerns of the Leicester fans there, Rob. They'll still no doubt be quite cautious, particularly when it's Premier League clubs that are circling around. Can you give them confidence that he'll stay at all?
Look, as things stand right now, I can't see any way that Leicester would sell Kiernan Dewsbury Hall. But as I say, I'm not party to what some of the biggest clubs in the Premier League and the biggest clubs in Europe are thinking right now. If somebody of significance in terms of European status, maybe they've got European football, as Brighton have, let's point that out, then I think he would be keen potentially to talk to them. Dewsbury Hall isn't agitating for a move, but I think he would like a pay rise in line with what he feels and his representatives feel is his importance to the squad right now. He's still got 3 years left on his remaining deal, so Leicester feel under absolutely no pressure to sell him or to increase that wage bill at the moment. I think there's something they'd probably discuss in the summer. But from his perspective, he's very ambitious, Kiernan Dewsbury Hall. He wants to be playing European football. He wants to be playing at the top end of the Premier League, and he wants to be playing for England. That's where his ambition wants to take him. Can he achieve that with Leicester right now? Probably not in the Championship. But remember, Leicester are 7 points clear at the top of the Championship. And I think from Dewsbury Hall's perspective, he's thinking, well, hang on. If I were to move to Brentford or Brighton and Leicester got promoted, would Leicester be in and around the position in the Premier League table where Brighton and Brentford would expect to be next season? And I think he believes, and his representatives believe, that the answer to that is probably yes. And so is it a step up for him in the medium to long term to move to a Brentford or a Brighton? Probably not. But if one of the very big six in English football came in for him, or one of the big European clubs, I think that changes the dynamic. I think at the moment Leicester fans can probably rest a little bit more easily than they did a few days ago when this story first broke, because I see a real reluctance from Leicester to let him go. And a reluctance from Kiernan Dewsbury Hall himself to make a move to either Brighton or Brentford.
Rob, you mentioned PSR and it being tight for Leicester. Do you think they'll still maybe be in the market and try and get someone in before the window closes?
They're still keen, yeah, but it is tight. You're absolutely right. It is tight. I mean, Maresca, as I say, has made it pretty clear that he would like to bring in some reinforcements. And ironically, we're talking about Dewsbury Hall. He would like some reinforcements in midfield. It's not been any secret, his admiration for Stefano Sensi, the Inter Milan holding midfield player. And I've just had some information that suggests that deal is looking a lot closer. It would be a loan from Inter Milan for the remainder of the season, but probably an obligation for Leicester to buy. And that, I think, will be the concern. Probably only an obligation that Leicester would agree to if they were promoted to the Premier League. So if they can insert that clause in there, I think that Sensi deal could well be done in the next few days, certainly before Thursday's deadline. We were under the impression that Leicester needed to move some players out or reduce their wage bill in order to bring somebody else in. I think that is still the case in terms of profit and sustainability rules, but there's wiggle room there, and Leicester believe that they can reduce the wage bill in the coming days elsewhere with other players, which allows them to do the Sensi deal now. So don't be surprised if Stefano Sensi is a Leicester City player before the deadline, and it could happen in the next couple of days, so that it doesn't actually run it very close.
And finally, away from Leicester to their rivals, really, Nottingham Forest. What's the latest on Divock Origi?
Yeah, interesting one, because it was a big signing for Nottingham Forest, Divock Origi, a really high-profile one, and it hasn't worked out for him, has it? He hasn't had much game time with Nottingham Forest. On loan from AC Milan, my understanding is that Forest are prepared to release Origi from that loan deal. They do have an option to buy him, by the way, Forest, but I don't see them exercising that option anytime soon. They would be prepared to get Origi off their wage bill and cancel the loan for the rest of the season, which would allow Divock Origi to talk to Los Angeles FC about a loan deal with them. As I understand it, Los Angeles FC have agreed a loan deal in principle with his parent club AC Milan to take him on loan for the remainder of the season to the MLS, with an obligation to buy him for £4.25 million in the summer. That appeals to AC Milan, of course, because they would like to get him off the books full stop. But for that deal to happen, Forest have to agree to cancel Origi's loan. I'm told they are prepared to do that, and discussions with all three clubs, even though it's a little bit complicated, are ongoing. But it looks like Origi's days at the City Ground could be cut short in the next few days.
Rob, great to speak to you. Thank you. Still to come on Good Morning Transfers, we'll bring you the thoughts of the Newcastle manager, Eddie Howe. Welcome back to Good Morning Transfers. Plenty of reports about arrivals and exits at St James's Park this January, but not much activity as of yet. Eddie Howe has been speaking to the media this morning about whether there's late moves are about to be made at Newcastle.
What will take to go to Park? Will it have Miguel Almiron and Jamal Lascelles in it because they weren't with you at the weekend?
We hope Miggy will be with us. Jamal, I'm not so sure about. Again, I said after the game, it's not a serious injury, but I think it might be enough to keep him out of this game. But we'll wait and see. I think it'll be close. But we certainly hope to have Miggy with us.
Eddie, 4 days left of the transfer window. I know you'll be looking forward to it closing. Are the club still active in the transfer market?
Still active.
Nothing's
changed. Yeah. Nothing's changed. It's copy and paste from after the game, before the game against Fulham. And, I've got no fresh news to give you. We're still sort of waiting to see what will happen.
It felt a little bit like when you spoke on Friday that either Almiron or Wilson could potentially go, just by the way you said, like, some things are out of your control, and there's noise around it, and that noise comes from somewhere. Is that still the case, or can you put a closure on these guys leaving?
You trying to put words into my mouth, Keith? I don't think I said that. We are waiting to see what happens. I don't want to talk about individual player names. I don't think that's right. Yeah, so that's what I say.
If you are to add, do you need to lose someone? Or can
Yeah, I think it's a complex situation, so I don't think anything's clear-cut. All eventualities could happen. Probably what we won't do is bring a player in without losing one the other way. I think that would be impossible. But I think all other options could still happen.
There's a report this morning that the club have made an approach to Aston Villa. I don't know if it's recent or if it's historical, for midfielder Jacob Ramsey. Anything you could tell us on that?
That's incorrect.
OK. And also Matt Targett, is there a potential that he could potentially go out on loan? Again, another report that Celtic had made an inquiry.
Incorrect. Matt's
well
injured.
today.
No, you're way off. Matt's injured, and he's still got some time to go in his injury, and he's also a big part of what we're doing here.
OK, Eddie Howe doesn't really give much away usually, but he did actually say there is nothing in the reports linking Newcastle with Jacob Murphy, which is quite interesting, actually. But we'll start with Jacob Ramsey. Sorry, Jacob Murphy's already there, isn't he? Miguel Almiron, Dave, we'll start with that. What did you think about what he said about him? What he said was he might actually be available for tomorrow night's game against Aston Villa. Well, that is still before the deadline.
Yeah, he didn't really say too much about Miguel Almiron, did he? So he said he missed the Newcastle game, the Fulham game, I should say, through illness. So he was hoping that he was available. And he went on to say it's kind of copy and paste from his last news conference from before the game. So that would suggest that he's hoping and he's desperate to keep him, because that's what he said at his pre-match news conference. Keith tried to ask him the question there around what he said on Friday around the noise comes from somewhere, and Eddie tried to kind of straight about that and say, are you trying to put words in my mouth? But he definitely said something to that effect on Friday about players leaving the club, that the noise comes from somewhere. So all eventualities are on the table for Miguel Almiron. He could stay, he could go. I think from Newcastle's point of view, as we've been talking about, really, the way to increase their wriggle room between now and the deadline is to move a player out, and Miguel Almiron still is the most likely to leave.
Well, he did say it's impossible for Newcastle to sign anyone unless somebody goes. So that's Almiron. It does appear, Nabeed, that Trippier is staying, though.
Yeah, it was a saga that we spoke about for about a week, of Trippier going to Bayern, speaking about why it made sense, then occasionally speaking about why it didn't make sense. And now we've ended up in a situation where I think, in the end, all parties will be relatively satisfied. Newcastle wanted to keep one of their key players. And as for Bayern, they didn't want to pay any more. And I think Trippier himself has said he's committed to Newcastle. So in the end, I think it's a win-win for everyone, especially for Eddie Howe in the end, because he wouldn't have wanted to lose probably Trippier, Isak, who was also linked with a move away, Bruno Guimaraes. And I think other players that have been linked, like Almiron, is probably a little bit more inclined to at least entertain the conversation.
Yeah, got some quotes from Trippier from after the Fulham game, actually. It's always a compliment when a team like Bayern come in for you. It's one of those things happen in the background. As always, I had lots of conversation with the manager and been very positive. Nothing changed. I'm committed to Newcastle. I want to play for the club, create history, win a trophy, and they've got a massive chance in the FA Cup, haven't they? And help grow the club. It's the transfer window. It has not put me off or anything like that. I'm Newcastle. I am committed, and that will never change. The words there of Kieran Trippier there, not me, I should add. Ellen, Callum Wilson, he's been subject of lots of interest. We know about the loan offer from Atletico Madrid. But Wilson, can you see any way in which Newcastle, would that make sense at all for Newcastle to let him go?
Absolutely not. It would leave them with just one fit striker in Isak, which, when you look at the ambitions that Newcastle have, is nowhere near enough. That seems, completely absurd. Obviously, Gordon can play in that position. He's been covering for Barnes and fitted in really well on the wing. It would make no sense at all to let him go. Another one that the fans would hate to lose as well. We've spoken about that with pretty much all the players who have had rumours and speculation around them. Great goal-scoring record. Been, a key part of the club for so long. Much loved by the fans. He has got 18 months left in his contract, and like we say, with the profit and sustainability rules, now could potentially be a good time to sell him from a money point of view, but they'd absolutely have to replace him. There's no doubt about that at all.
The other thing for Newcastle is they don't exactly score goals freely. They have certain games where they have a purple patch where almost everything they touch ends up in the back of their net. But aside from Isak having a purple patch this season, and actually I think he's been very good this season, his injury record suggests the moment you take him out, it's a completely different type of striker that has to go in and play there. And I think the two of them so far, Eddie Howe, I think it was a question last season about how do you balance two strikers that want to both play. And I think he said a few times, I'd love for them to play together. So I think in terms of having sort of like the yin and yang type strikers, they're the two perfect profiles for Eddie Howe to work with.
Dave, and with so many Premier League clubs are wanting a striker, they also know, Eddie Howe's just said it there, they'd have to sell to buy. So can you imagine all these Premier League clubs coming in for Wilson, knowing that 18 months left in his contract, they think they might be able to get a bargain?
Trying to think how to word it. So, from my point of view, I don't think Callum Wilson would bring in enough money that Newcastle would need to reinvest in that squad in order to bring them back up to Champions League level. Now, I'm saying that I know they have been in the Champions League this season, but as it stands, it doesn't look like they're going to be able to get into the top four, barring a late run, which is obviously still possible. But given that Callum Wilson has only got 18 months left on his contract, given his age, given his injury history, I'm not sure that the type of money that would be on offer from other clubs for Callum Wilson would allow them to say, go and spend 60 million or 70 million on a replacement or another striker. Now, I think from Eddie Howe's point of view, I think he does have the option of using Anthony Gordon in a striker position. I think it's a position he's played previously. But would he be comfortable going into the rest of the season with Isak and Gordon as his main strikers, given the fact that Isak hasn't got the best injury record as well? I'm not so sure. I think probably the scenario that Eddie Howe will probably end up with is keeping Callum Wilson. I don't think he'll be too disappointed with that. I think this window's been about keeping hold of Newcastle's best players.
Also, Harvey Barnes has been injured. That's the big one where I think Newcastle probably banked on him coming good, and they might have played Gordon off the right-hand side, and then that front three looks very different if you've got Isak through the middle, Harvey Barnes and Anthony Gordon. But because of his injury issues this season, and which, by the way, it's not an injury that he didn't tear his hamstring, so he's going to go through this over and over again. It was an injury that he will recover from and hopefully come back and be completely fine. I think if Harvey Barnes was fully fit, maybe Eddie Howe would entertain Callum Wilson leaving a little more, but in their current injury situation, it just seems too risky.
And I think Newcastle have been unfortunate in the fact that their main summer outlays last year have both been unavailable for obviously very different reasons, but Barnes and Tonali not playing. Those were the two marquee signings in the summer, and Eddie Howe hasn't really been able to call on them.
Right, well, you'd be able to call on Lewis Hall, who's been on the bench a lot, but I suppose he is younger. Joe Linton, Dave, we know he's out. He's not going to go in this window because he's injured until close to the end of the season. We understand. No news of a new deal yet. Can you see this one being resolved with Joe Linton just getting a new contract?
I can. I think, his story is one of the great Premier League stories. He has gone from almost a meme to being this rampaging number 8 in midfield. It's quite phenomenal, really. And I think he has symbolised, he has become the symbol of the new Newcastle under Eddie Howe. The fact that he took over a group that was so underperforming, or maybe not even underperforming. Maybe a lot of people thought that was Newcastle's level, just in that bottom half of the Premier League. And he has turned these players into top 6 players. And Joe Linton has symbolised that, really.
Don't start that again.
He symbolised that. I mean, he has literally gone from a striker who wasn't scoring to this midfielder, all action, box to box, and also has been, he's been used in different positions, not just central midfield, but out wide on the left-hand side. He's been quite key in the way that Newcastle build up. They look for him a lot from goal kicks, from long passes from the back as well. He's good aerial threat. So he's someone who has symbolised the increase of profile in Newcastle as a club. I would expect him to stay at some point.
Joe Wellington, or Big Joe, as they call him up there. Right, more Premier League managers to come. Chris Wilder is on the way. Plus, have Brentford beaten off competition from Tottenham to sign Antonio Nusa? Sheffield United are back in Premier League action tomorrow night. They travel to Crystal Palace, and with deadline day looming on Thursday, let's hear from the Sheffield United boss, Chris Wilder.
Well, look, we've got a game to talk about, but before I get on to that, deadline day is fast approaching. You've been linked with a number of central defenders, all with Premier League experience. Is it that experience that's key, and how close are you to bringing in that signing?
Yeah, you're spot on. We have been linked, and you're correct again. Yeah, it is vital that we have someone that has played in the division or has played in a level that is equivalent to the Premier League. We talked about it when we first looked at bringing players that make us better or stronger as a group. And we feel we've done that with Ivor and most certainly with Ben. We weren't going to make wholesale changes, but we wanted to bring quality in. Few players going out, which they have done, but definitely bringing quality in to strengthen the group and to push the group. So, fingers crossed again over. And I think obviously everybody understands as well as it was. There's still games going on and incredibly important ones going on. Game on Saturday, obviously, and then a game Tuesday, and still we are as well working frantically to improve our group, and hopefully we'll do that before the window shuts.
Could it go right down to the wire, do you think?
Yeah, it could do. Yeah, I mean, listen, there's always three things got to happen. Player wants to come. We make the correct offer, and I've identified those players. And then the selling club as well, whether not in a selling sort of way, Kirsty, in terms of a loan, because that's what it's going to be. Because everybody's got to look at their group as well. So pretty much similar to me. If anybody came in for our players, I've got to make sure that we're covered and we're not light going into a really important second part of the season.
Could we see any more departures? You mentioned Ivo Gerbic coming in. What does that mean for the future of Wes Foderingham? There's been reports that you would be willing to let him go in this window. Is that right?
Well, Wes asked the question, would he be available to go out on loan? And I said, listen, let's see what happens, see who comes to the table on that, and we'll discuss and analyse everything. And I was up front with Wes, always have been, in terms of what we were doing and the position with Ivor, and but like I've just said there, I'm not going to leave ourselves light as well, so I have to make sure that department is well stocked. I did. I put myself out there and said Ivor's going to be the number one, and if we're buying an experienced goalkeeper for money and offering him a 3.5-year deal, as we talked about, he's going to come in and be that number one. But injuries, suspensions can happen, so I've got to make sure as well, like I said, I don't leave myself slight, and we'll just see how that plays out.
So that was Chris Wilder. We've got loads more transfer stories to get through. Brentford have agreed a £25 million deal in principle with Club Bruges to sign winger Antonio Nusa. He'll stay on loan at the Belgian club until the end of the season. Remember, Tottenham have also been in talks over a deal for Nusa that would see him remain there until the summer. But it looks like it's going to be Brentford and Abeid. How excited should their fans be?
I mean, I think I was sat here last week when he was linked to Spurs, and I was saying this is a flat-out unbelievable signing from Spurs, because it's the exact sort of player that Ange Postecoglou would like. And the fact that he's going to Brentford now, even more so makes me excited, because Brentford typically have developed forwards really well over the past 3 or 4 seasons. He's quick, he's so exciting. I think Kevin Hatchard's in later, isn't he?
Yes.
Oh, man.
Midday transfer talk.
Whoa, I'm raving about him. Wait till Kevin Hatchard's in here. He absolutely loves him. But he's been nicknamed the young Neymar, or the Norwegian Neymar, should I say. So, yeah, he's a player that will get you off your seat, and I think he suits Brentford so well.
Right, OK, well, Crystal Palace could be busy. Daniel Munoz will have a medical ahead of an £8.5 million move from Genk. He's a right-back, by the way, while they're also considering another offer for Blackburn's Adam Wharton, central midfielder. Ellen, what type of central midfielder is he?
Well, this is a player that I'm really excited about. I don't think it carries the same kind of weight as Neves just said. But
as the Norwegian
Neymar. Yeah, not quite. But Adam Wharton, 19 years old, Blackburn youth product, came through the academy, spent all his career at the club. I am not surprised at all that Premier League clubs are sniffing around him. Central midfielder. Really impressed in the EFL Cup against Chelsea in November. He creates really good chances, has a really good eye for distribution and evades the press really well. 29 appearances, 2 goals, 3 assists. John Dahl Tomasson said that he has Champions League quality despite not being the final product yet. So I think that's a fairly good endorsement from his boss.
I interviewed John Dahl Tomasson last season, and post-game we were speaking about Ben Bertrand-Diaz at the time and a few others, and I said to him, like, if you had one player that you think is going right to the top, he immediately was like, Adam. And I was like, was he playing today? And he was like, yeah, that's exactly what I mean. He was like, you missed the quality in this player. So, when a legend of the game is saying that about you, it tells a lot. But 20 million, by the way, Championship club rejecting £20 million is utter madness.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly very highly rated at Blackburn. And of course, some of the owners, they think, well, if we go up with him, going up is worth much more than 20 million. That's sometimes what they think. But interesting to see what the Blackburn fans think about that. Dave, West Ham, what's going on there?
Yeah, I would expect them to be busy before the end of the transfer window. At the moment, they're trying to get over the line Ibrahim Osman from Nordjylland. From what we're hearing over the weekend, my colleague Dharmesh Sheth was saying that essentially the move has stalled at the moment. They've not been able to agree the deal with the Danish side. I think he's posted on his own social media as well, an egg timer, kind of hoping to try and get this deal sorted for himself. But as it stands, the deal for Osman is kind of off for the moment. May well be resurrected before the deadline, as these things tend to happen. I think the other one concerning West Ham is Pablo Fornals. I think Real Betis have been in talks with West Ham about Pablo Fornals. You wonder whether one deal is dependent on the other, whether West Ham would be comfortable in letting go Fornals if the Osman deal doesn't happen. So it's one to watch for West Ham. You would expect things to happen before the deadline for them.
Very quickly, Ellen, Morgan Rogers to Aston Villa, a third bid. Is he ready to step up?
Yeah, well, Villa have been persistent, haven't they? He only joined Middlesbrough 6 months ago. They're 11th in the Championship. His career started at West Brom, from the West Midlands originally. Really versatile forward, top scorer in the League Cup, which would suggest that he's ready to step up. But Philogene and Archer have all left Villa due to game time, so would he be going into a position where he's not getting game time? I think probably so. But yeah, I think he's ready to make the move into the Premier League, but not quite starting 11 yet.
OK, and in Italy, Lazio after Jack Clark, but they can get lost. Right, Good Morning Transfers is back the same time tomorrow morning, 9 a.m, only a few days left to go. But Transfer Talks here at midday. Kevin Hatchard joins the team, and the Transfer Show tonight at 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. On the way next, it's the Football Show with Stephen Warnock and Sue Smith and Rob Watson.